She thought she would die alone in the canyon, wrapped in the crushing coils of a giant python. But then, from the dust and silence, came something no one expected. Not a man, not a machine, but a lion. Wild, wounded, and willing to fight for a human he'd never known. What happened next would leave a scar on the land and a mark on every soul who heard it. The morning sun crawled slowly over the towering red cliffs of Canyonlands National Park, casting long golden shadows across the sandstone formations that loomed like ancient watchmen. The air was cool for this part of Utah, with a breeze that whispered through narrow slot canyons and ruffled the sparse creosote bushes. In the nearby town of Moab, life stirred slowly. Coffee brewed in old mugs, boots were laced, and maps were unfolded. But in the far reaches of the park, deeper than most tourists ever wandered, silence ruled. It wasn't the stillness of peace, but the tense hush before something breaks. Rebecca Palmer, 32, stood at the edge of a narrow ridge, her boots firm in the ochre sand, scanning the trail below with a practiced eye. She had the lean, agile frame of someone used to moving through rough terrain, her khaki ranger uniform neatly pressed despite the layers of red dust. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail, revealing a face both gentle and resilient. Her gray-blue eyes were calm but alert, framed by faint lines that told of years spent squinting against the desert sun. Rebecca was known by her colleagues as someone deeply committed to wildlife conservation, quiet, thoughtful, and tough as rawhide. Few knew the burden she carried. 5 years ago, she'd lost her younger brother to a rock climbing accident not far from this very park. Since then, she had made these lands both her mission and her sanctuary. That morning, something felt off. The usual chatter of canyon wrens and scrub jays was absent. Even the wind, which usually hummed through the buttes like an old song, seemed to hold its breath. Rebecca crouched, brushing her fingers through a faint track in the sand. It wasn't deer, nor coyote. The grooves were too deep, sinuous. Something had slithered here, and not recently. She tilted her head, her instincts pressing her forward. Less than 3 miles away, in a more secluded part of the canyon, a man sat cross-legged beneath a juniper tree, sharpening a dull knife on a sandstone slab. Eli Turner, 41, had the weathered face of someone who'd lived many lives. Tall, with broad shoulders and sun-browned skin, his short, dark blonde hair was flecked with gray, and his green eyes were watchful, often haunted. A scar curved beneath his right eye, a memento from Afghanistan, though he rarely spoke of it. Since returning from combat, Eli had withdrawn from society, choosing instead a life of quiet observation. He lived in a small camper tucked near a forgotten trailhead, with only an old radio and a dog-eared copy of Desert Solitaire to keep him company. Nature didn't judge or ask questions. This morning, Eli had been walking his usual loop when he noticed them, odd drag marks in the sand, wide and deep, not snake, not tire, something heavier. His gut tightened. He crouched beside the trail, laying a calloused hand on the marks, still fresh. No dust had yet settled into the grooves. A hawk screamed high above, circling once before vanishing into the cliff shadows. Rebecca followed the winding gorge, tracing the strange trail. Her radio buzzed softly on her hip, but she didn't use it. Not yet. She believed in listening before speaking, in watching before acting. That's what had kept her safe out here. That and respect. For the land, for its rules, and for its quiet warnings. The trail led her to a narrow pass between two rock walls. Here, the air shifted subtly, cooler, denser. Rebecca hesitated, then moved forward, her boot stepping into a patch of shaded sand. And then, silence. The wind stopped, her breath caught, and she was gone. The walkie-talkie on her belt let out a faint crackle before falling quiet. No struggle, no cry, just absence. Not far away, Eli stood up from where he'd been kneeling. The drag marks had turned into a series of deeper impressions, circles, overlapping coils. Something had rested here, something massive. His military instincts kicked in, honed from years of navigating foreign terrain and ambushes. His fingers brushed the small knife at his belt, not a weapon of war, but still familiar. He heard the absence, too, that eerie hush, and it wasn't right. He scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. The red rocks glowed in the rising sun, but the shadows seemed too deep in the gorges, too still. High on a ledge, something moved. Just for a moment, a shape, a ripple of muscle beneath golden fur. It stood tall, broad-shouldered and heavy with power, tail flicking. A mountain lion, not unusual for these parts, but there was something different in the way this one moved. It wasn't hunting, it was watching. Eli squinted. The cat's posture wasn't aggressive, it was tense, wary. Its amber eyes didn't flick to prey, they stayed locked on something deeper in the canyon, and then it disappeared behind the rocks. Eli followed.
Rebecca awoke to the sound of her own heartbeat, slow, pounding, and painfully loud. Her eyelids fluttered open, but the world around her remained dim and narrow. She was wedged between two slabs of rock, the air cool and damp, but choked with the scent of earth, dust, and something older, something reptilian. She tried to move, and pain flooded her spine. Her arms were pinned, her legs immobilized, and her chest constricted so tightly that each breath came in shallow gulps. Then she understood. Something was wrapped around her. Not one thing, multiple. Her skin pressed against muscle, not her own, but something that moved, contracted, pulsed. Scales. Cold, smooth, damp scales. She looked down as much as she could and saw it. Thick as a man's thigh, dark with iridescent patches, a massive snake, and not alone. 3 of them, coiled around her body like living ropes of death. One around her ankles, one mid-torso, and the third tight across her ribcage and shoulders, pinning her against the rock. She wanted to scream, but the pressure on her chest made even a gasp a battle. These weren't rattlesnakes or any native species to Utah. Her brain, sharp even under pressure, recognized the patterns. South American pythons, boas, or perhaps anacondas. Smuggled, released, escaped. Whatever the origin, they shouldn't be here. And yet here they were. In the faint light trickling in from the canyon above, she could see one of the snake's eyes, black and unblinking, mere inches from her own. Rebecca clenched her jaw. Panic would kill her faster than the reptiles would. She forced herself to think. Her radio was gone. Her sidearm, if it hadn't fallen off in the fall, was pinned beneath layers of muscle. Her knife? Her belt pouch was obscured, likely unreachable. Outside, the world remained unaware. Except one. Eli Turner crouched behind a mesquite tree, squinting toward the rocky ledge where the mountain lion had disappeared. He hadn't brought a weapon, just his old military-grade binoculars and a weathered canteen. He moved with the patience of someone who knew better than to startle the desert. Each step deliberate, soft, steady. Then he heard it, a sound so faint most ears would miss it, a dry scuffle of scales against stone. He moved lower, crawling now through the dry brush, eyes scanning the narrow split in the canyon walls. There was movement below, shadows tangled in the crevice. Eli lifted the binoculars and adjusted the focus, and his breath caught. Coils, long, thick, unnatural, and something in the center of it all. A face. It was her, Rebecca, eyes open, jaw clenched. Alive but barely. Eli's hands trembled. His first instinct was to jump down, fight, pull her free, but he'd learned long ago that instinct and intelligence were not the same thing. He took a breath, lowered the binoculars, and scanned again. Then he saw it, high on a boulder, silent and still the lion. The mountain lion, fur thick and golden, shoulders taut and ready to spring, stood like a statue carved by wind. It wasn't crouched to pounce. It was watching, calculating, guarding. Eli had seen this look before, not in animals but in fellow soldiers. The stillness before the chaos. The lion, Asher, had seen the snakes too, but it wasn't acting out of instinct. It was waiting for something. Down in the crevice, Rebecca tried to shift her weight. Her thoughts were beginning to blur, her muscles weakening from lack of oxygen. Her training whispered cold truths. Constriction would cut off circulation. Nerves would begin to die. And eventually, so would she. She felt a tear slide from the corner of her eye, vanishing into the dirt. But then movement. Above her, barely visible between the rocks, a shadow passed. Her blurry vision registered fur. A shape. The lion. It moved like a ghost, deliberate and noiseless. Its gaze locked onto hers for one breathless second, and in it, she saw something she couldn't explain. Not hunger, not curiosity, purpose. Then it vanished again. Meanwhile, Eli shifted his weight and ducked behind a taller boulder, pulling out a folded topographic map from his backpack. He needed to find a way down without alerting the snakes. His eyes traced the ridges and drop-offs, then paused. There was a ledge just 15 feet down that offered partial cover. From there, he might get close enough. Suddenly, behind him, a soft panting sound broke the silence. He turned sharply and saw a dog. Lenny, a lean and scrappy Australian cattle dog, stood a few feet away, tail wagging hesitantly, eyes wide and alert. His gray-blue fur was matted with dust, and his left ear bent awkwardly to the side, a remnant of some old injury. A small tag dangled from his collar, worn but readable, property of Ranger Station 3. Lenny had wandered off from a ranger team last week. Eli had seen the notice on a torn flyer in Moab's general store. The dog seemed to recognize Eli's tension and dropped low to the ground, crawling forward as if seeking permission. Eli studied him. "You're quiet," he whispered. "Good. Come on." With the dog trailing softly behind, Eli began his descent. Rebecca's vision dimmed again. Her heart pounded slower now. The world faded in and out like a dying campfire. But she heard something scraping, a shifting of pebbles above, and then a faint exhale, not reptilian. The lion was still there. It moved down the rocks slowly, deliberately, a predator descending not for the kill, but for rescue. She didn't know why. She didn't care. Her last conscious thought was a prayer to something older than words. Don't let it be too late. The canyon trembled with a soundless force, as if the rock itself had taken a breath. Down in the crevice, Rebecca's body shuddered under the increasing constriction of the three pythons, their coils tightening with a patient, dreadful rhythm. Her chest screamed for air, vision swimming in and out of black. Muscles twitched involuntarily. Her thoughts blurred into sensation. Cold pressure, stillness, fear, fading. Then a tremor in the dust. It wasn't loud. There was no roar, no crashing limbs. But it was felt. The snakes paused just slightly. Their glossy heads lifted in perfect, eerie synchronization, tongues flickering with unease. They sensed it too. Something was coming. And then it appeared. Asher, the lion, stepped into the narrow light spilling between the canyon walls. His coat, golden as dying sunlight, bore a fine shimmer of dust. He moved without sound, each pawfall so measured it was like the earth accepted his presence rather than resisted it. Muscles rippled under his frame, powerful but not exaggerated. His tail flicked once, his amber eyes, aglow with an ancient fire, focused not on Rebecca, not even on the snakes, but on something deeper, the very balance of the wild that had been disturbed. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't growl. He just stood, a figure of silent defiance in the pit of fear. High above, Eli crouched behind a jagged outcrop, binoculars pressed tightly to his face. His breath caught. It was as if the desert itself had conjured the lion from sandstone and heat waves. He watched, transfixed. It wasn't just awe, it was memory. The calm before firefight. The way his old sergeant had once stood when they were surrounded in a foreign valley, shoulders squared, eyes forward, refusing to give in. That same energy was in Asher now. Beside him, Lenny the cattle dog let out a whimper, low and uncertain. Eli patted the dog's side gently, keeping both of them still. "Wait," he whispered. In the crevice, the largest snake, the one wrapped across Rebecca's chest, tightened in response to the lion's approach. She wheezed, her body jerking in panic, but Asher didn't flinch. His paw shifted forward, digging claws lightly into the ground. It was a gesture of readiness, not threat. The snakes held their position, confused. For the first time, they were no longer the apex. Asher moved, one stride, then two. The second snake hissed, a long, dry sound, more vibration than noise. It uncoiled slightly, unsure whether to retreat or strike. The third lifted its head, black tongue flickering in and out. Asher paused, then sprang. He launched from the ledge with a grace that defied his weight. Dust exploded beneath him as he struck the nearest snake in a blur of gold and claws. The force of impact drove both creatures across the rocks. The snake writhed, coiling instinctively around Asher's foreleg, but the lion raked its back with precision. Not rage. Strategy. Eli couldn't believe what he was seeing. He watched Asher pivot his hindquarters and slam the second snake with his shoulder, disrupting its grip on Rebecca. The lion's actions weren't just animal instinct. They were surgical, purposeful. Below, Rebecca gasped. Her chest heaved, air flooding in where the pressure had broken. She blinked, and for a moment, she didn't understand what was happening. Then she saw Asher, his mane wild with movement, his flank bloodied from a glancing bite, but still fighting, still protecting. One of the snakes withdrew, slithering back into the crack where sunlight couldn't reach. The second coiled tighter around Asher's middle, tried to crush him from the ribs. The third darted back toward Rebecca in desperation. And then another sound, an echo not from nature, but man. A single sharp whistle. Rebecca turned her head weakly. From the rim above, Eli had risen. He held a small signal mirror in one hand, using the morning sun to flash streaks of light down into the gorge. It was a risky distraction, but it worked. The third snake paused, confused by the glint. It loosened momentarily. That was all Asher needed. With one final surge, the lion twisted, gripping the snake's neck in his jaws and throwing it against the stone with brutal force. The creature writhed once, then stilled. The last snake released Asher's flank and vanished into the shadows. Asher staggered, panting, blood matting the fur along his side. He turned to Rebecca and stood over her protectively, shoulders heaving. He didn't touch her. He simply stayed. Eli iksalid yakili. He'd seen enough. It was time to go down. Behind him, another voice called out, sharp and female. Turner? Eli Turner? That you? He turned, startled. A woman emerged from behind a cluster of pinyon trees, carrying a field radio and wearing a park medic vest. Sarah Whitlock, 38, medium height, wiry build, with tightly coiled blonde hair tucked under her cap. Her skin was freckled and sun-scorched, her eyes sharp and skeptical, but kind. She was known around Moab as the ranger medic who never panicked, even when dragging a dehydrated tourist out of a canyon solo. Years ago, she lost her older brother in a flash flood. He'd been a ranger too. Since then, she'd taken the job of watching over the others seriously. I followed Lenny, Sarah said, motioning to the dog. Thought you might have gone off the grid again. Rebecca's down there, Eli said, voice tight. She's alive, but barely. Sarah glanced down, eyes scanning the gorge, then spotted the lion. Oh my God, she murmured. I think he saved her. They stared, silent. Asher didn't look up. His body was between Rebecca and the world. The dust had settled. The blood was drying. But he hadn't moved. Not yet. The silence shattered. The canyon that once whispered now thundered with the chaos of a primal war. Asher, the lion carved from fire and dusk, slammed into the first python with a roar that didn't come from his throat, but from the very marrow of the land itself. Dust exploded in a halo around him, masking fang, claw, and scale in a blur of violence. The snake writhed under him, its powerful coils flailing, but Asher didn't falter. He pinned it down with the full weight of his body and crushed its spine with one brutal swipe of his paw. Rebecca, still pinned beneath two serpents, gasped as pressure loosened from her chest. She coughed violently, blood staining her lips, but oxygen rushed in like salvation. Her arms twitched. Nerve endings slowly reawakened. The relief was momentary. The second python, undeterred, slithered from the shadows and launched at Asher's neck with terrifying speed. In seconds, its coils wrapped around the lion's shoulders, chest, and finally his throat, pulling him back, tightening with a rhythm of death. Asher roared again, this time with pain, stumbling sideways, claws scraping against the canyon floor. Up on the ridge, Eli stood frozen behind a rock ledge. Sarah crouched beside him. His hand was clenched around the flare gun she'd passed him. Old, worn, dented from years in her medical pack, but still functional. "Now or never," Sarah whispered, her voice low and urgent. Ilias Durstihitchit. His palms were slick. Flashes of war slammed into him. The sight of smoke, the weight of choices, the ringing in his ears after every decision made too late. But Rebecca was down there. That lion, fighting with everything he had, was down there. Ili Iksolit. No more waiting. He stood up and raised the flare gun. Lenny barked once, startled by the movement. The flare fired upward with a hiss, streaking pink light into the pale blue sky. It burst just above the canyon with a crack like shattering glass. A brilliant flash followed, echoing across the rocks. The snakes flinched. The third python, the one lurking behind Rebecca, reared up in confusion. The one choking Asher loosened just slightly, enough. With a surge of strength fueled by instinct and fury, Asher twisted violently, his massive paws grasping the snake's neck. He dragged it forward, slammed it into the canyon wall, then again. A sickening crunch echoed. The serpent spasmed, then went limp, sliding to the floor in a heap. Asher turned back to Rebecca, but the third snake had made its move. It lunged, not toward her this time, but straight for the lion's exposed flank. It sank its teeth in and began to coil around Asher's midsection, fighting like a cornered devil. Rebecca forced herself upright. Her arms ached, her legs barely responded, but she reached down, fingers trembling, and unclipped the emergency knife from her belt. She rolled to her side, teeth gritted, and began crawling toward the lion. Up above, Sarah was already on the radio, calling in coordinates, voice clear and cold with efficiency. "This is Ranger Medic Whitlock. Code red. We have one confirmed ranger down, currently responsive. One non-threat wildlife in critical condition. 2 hostile serpents neutralized, 1 active. Request wildlife support and medevac. Location, Dry Needle Canyon, Sector 9. Behind her, Eli was already descending the slope. Down in the canyon, Asher roared, thrashing against the constricting snake, blood pouring from his side where scales met fur. Rebecca crawled closer, her knife gripped tightly in one hand. The serpent's tail lashed across her arm, but she held on. She reached Asher. With her last ounce of strength, she drove the knife into the snake's lower body, just beneath a coil. The blade didn't go deep, but it was enough. The creature jerked violently, and Asher seized the moment. He bit down hard, this time at the neck, and didn't let go. It took 30 more seconds of struggle. Then the canyon was silent again. Asher collapsed beside Rebecca, his flanks heaving, blood streaking his side. Rebecca turned to face him, resting her head in the dust, tears mixing with dirt. She whispered, "You saved me." He blinked slowly, then looked away. Footsteps echoed. Eli arrived first, breath ragged, dropping to his knees beside them. "I've got you," he said, placing a steady hand on Rebecca's shoulder. Behind him came Sarah, already preparing bandages, adrenaline driving her every move. She glanced once at the lion and paused. "He's still breathing," she said quietly. "He's still fighting." From her pack, she retrieved a rolled gauze and began patching the worst of Asher's wounds. "If we can get him stabilized, we might just—" A new figure appeared over the ridge, Dr. Martin Hale, the regional wildlife veterinarian. In his early 50s, tall and sharp-featured with silver-streaked brown hair, he was known for his unshakable calm and encyclopedic knowledge of native species. He wore a dusty button-up and thick cargo pants, his vet kit slung across his back. He didn't say a word as he moved toward Asher. After a brief exam, he nodded to Sarah. "We can move him," he said. But we need to act now. The canyon floor was painted in red earth and darker stains of battle, the silence broken only by the ragged breath of survivors. The final serpent, larger than the others, moved with a fury born of desperation. Its massive form coiled through broken stone and dust, muscles contracting, eyes unblinking. Blood still dripped from the gouges Asher had delivered, but it wasn't retreating. It was aiming, right for Rebecca. She was barely sitting upright, the knife clutched in her scraped, trembling hand. Her body was failing her, but her eyes never blinked. Not when a shadow loomed. Not when the snake reared back to strike. The lion moved first. Asher, despite the deep gashes along his side and the blood seeping from his neck, threw himself between her and the snake with the force of a landslide. He slammed into the serpent mid-lunge, teeth bared, claws tearing at scale and flesh. The two collided in a storm of dust and pain, the impact knocking Rebecca backwards into the base of the sandstone wall. She didn't cry out. She simply watched, stunned and broken, as the lion battled death itself. Asher roared, a low and guttural sound that echoed through the ravine like a war drum. The snake wrapped around him quickly, tighter than before, squeezing with relentless strength. His paws struggled, claws slashing in a blind frenzy. Blood sprayed across the stone. And then came Eli. He arrived not with fanfare, but with fire in his eyes, his boots slamming against the rock as he ran, hands gripping a coiled rope he had retrieved from Sarah's medical pack. His body moved with the instinct of an old soldier, fast, sure, unhesitating. The same instinct that had once pulled a wounded comrade from under gunfire now drove him to leap onto the writhing mass of snake and lion. With one knee digging into the serpent's back, Eli looped the rope around its midsection and yanked hard, twisting with all the strength his frame still carried. The snake hissed, diverted, trying to whip around, but Asher seized a distraction, lunging with jaws wide and crushing down on its spine with a sickening crack. Eli didn't stop. He lashed the rope around the creature again and again until it began to spasm in defeat. Behind them, Rebecca tried to stand, only to fall again. "Stay down," Eli barked, his voice raw. "I've got you." The snake finally went still. Eli knelt beside Rebecca and gently pulled her away from the coil of crushed scales. She winced but said nothing. Her face was ghost pale, her lips dry and chapped, but she was alive. Her breathing came slow but steady. Asher stood shakily over them both, sides heaving. His mane was matted with blood and dirt, his gaze unfocused. And then his legs buckled. He collapsed. Eli rushed forward, placing both hands on the lion's chest, unsure what he was even doing. There was no training manual for this. No battlefield guide to treating a wounded guardian made of flesh and legend. But he pressed down on the deepest wound near the shoulder, trying to slow the blood loss. "I've got you," Eli whispered. "Just hang on, please." He didn't know why he said it. He didn't expect the lion to understand. But Asher's amber eyes opened, just slightly, and for a fleeting second, they looked at each other, man and beast. The same look Eli had once shared with Corporal Reyes in the sandpits of Kandahar, when he dragged him through the hail of bullets and Reyes whispered, "Don't let go." It was the look of two warriors recognizing each other, not by words, but by wounds carried silently through time. A quiet rustle followed. Sarah and Dr. Hale arrived with the stretcher and field gear. Sarah's face was streaked with sweat and red dust. She knelt beside Eli, hands already moving. "Pressure here," she ordered, placing a clean wrap under his hand. "Keep it firm." Dr. Hale moved to Rebecca, checking her pulse and pupils. His calm demeanor hadn't faltered despite the chaos. "She's stable, but we need a chopper within the hour. Fractured rib, possible internal bruising. And the lion, he won't last much longer if we don't seal these gashes." Sarah handed Eli a fresh bandage. "Keep pressing," she said. "We'll sedate him. Get the fluids in. If he fights us, he'll bleed faster." Asher didn't fight. He simply lay there, head tilted slightly toward Rebecca, as if watching to make sure she still breathed. In the sky, the distant thump of a helicopter began to echo, Lenny barked once, tail wagging nervously. Sarah looked up, shaded her eyes, and gave a tired but relieved nod. "Good," she said. "Help's coming." A shadow stepped into view behind them. Ranger Chief Dale Monroe, 56, tall and stocky, with a weather-worn face, thick gray beard, and authoritative presence that could silence a room with a glance. He wore the classic Ranger green, his badge tarnished at the corners from years of sun and service. Known for his blunt pragmatism, Dale had seen the worst nature and man could offer. But as he gazed down at the bloodied lion and the ranger who still clutched his mane, his voice softened. "What in God's name happened here?" Eli looked up, his hand still on Asher's chest. "A lion saved her," he said simply. "Then we saved him." Dale nodded once. No further questions. The sun climbed gently over the rust-red cliffs of Canyonlands, casting golden light on a land that now held a different weight, one of survival, sacrifice, and renewal. The wind moved softly across the mesas, stirring the sagebrush and whispering through dry cottonwoods, as if nature itself exhaled in gratitude. At the edge of the Cedar Hollow Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, just 15 miles from the Battleground Gorge, Asher lay beneath the shade of a canvas awning, stitched wounds along his ribs and shoulder now bandaged with veterinary precision. And four-line fed into his foreleg, his breath slow but steady. Though sedated, his ears flicked slightly at each noise, the distant hum of a generator, a soft clatter of metal trays. His golden coat had been carefully cleaned, revealing deep but healing scars. Standing nearby was Maya Lennox, the center's lead wildlife vet tech, in her late 20s, with tightly braided dark brown hair, a lean build, and steady hands. Maya had grown up in Arizona, daughter of a park ranger and nurse, and had long dedicated herself to animals that couldn't speak for themselves. Her gray eyes were sharp, but she carried a natural calm, speaking to the wounded lion in hushed tones as she adjusted his fore. "You're going to be a story they tell around here for a long time, big guy," she murmured. "You didn't just save a ranger. You changed something." Inside the center's office, Dr. Hale stood beside Sarah Whitlock, reviewing the latest scans on an old but functional monitor. "Muscle tears will take weeks," Hale said, pointing to a highlighted section. "But there's no internal bleeding left. That lion's built like a tank." Sarah, arms folded, her bandaged knuckles resting against her chin, nodded. Her face still bore the desert's dust, and her shoulders were taut with fatigue. But beneath her grit was something gentler, pride. "He fought like a ranger," she said quietly. "Deserves a medal if you ask me." Back in Moab Regional Hospital, sunlight streamed through tall windows of room 207. Rebecca Palmer blinked awake to the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor and the faint scent of antiseptic. Her side throbbed where cracked ribs had been wrapped tight. A fresh line of stitches curled above her left hip. But she was alive, and she wasn't alone. Sitting in the corner, slumped in a vinyl chair with a book on his chest, Eli Turner snored softly. Boots still dusty, flannel shirt rumpled, hair sticking up on one side. The book had slid open on a chapter about desert ecosystems. Lenny, curled up at his feet, lifted his head and gave a short tail wag as Rebecca stirred. She smiled faintly, her voice hoarse. "You came back." Eli blinked awake, groggy, but when his eyes met hers, they softened. "You didn't think I'd leave you in a hospital with nothing but lukewarm Jell-O and daytime television, did you?" She chuckled, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts like hell." He leaned forward. "You're safe. Asher made it. So did you." Tears welled in her eyes. "How bad is he?" "He's healing. Vet says he's got the heart of something ancient. He'll keep that scar across his side forever, but he's walking." She nodded, eyes distant now. "I saw it in his eyes. That wasn't just instinct. It was something else." Eli didn't argue. Some truths didn't need proof. They lived in the space between a heartbeat and a miracle. By the end of the week, news of the rescue had swept across Utah and beyond. Media vans parked briefly in Moab, capturing the story before it returned to the silence of the canyon. Headlines read, "Wild Lion Saves Ranger from Illegal Exotic Predators. Rebecca Palmer and the Beast of Canyonlands and guarded by grace, a lion sacrifice. But for those closest to it, the real story was quieter. Rebecca, though still sore, returned to the field office within a month. Her hair had grown longer during her recovery, and a faint scar now crossed her cheek, one she never covered. She wore it like a badge. She no longer hid the grief of losing her brother. Instead, she spoke of him when she lectured to young rangers in training, folding his name in his stories of wilderness ethics and courage under pressure. She also stood at the forefront of a new initiative, the Desert Guardian Project, a campaign against exotic animal smuggling. Appointed its public face, she testified before conservation committees, partnered with wildlife law enforcement, and shared Asher's story not as a tale of survival, but as a wake-up call. Eli, after some nudging from Sarah and a pointed talk with Chief Monroe, agreed to become a wilderness guide under the Canyonlands Wildlife Education Program. His first assignment: lead school groups into the safe zones of the park, teaching them about the natural balance, how to read animal tracks, and, when asked, sharing the legend of the lion who guarded the desert. At the rehab center, Asher's conditions steadily improved. He now roamed a large, enclosed reserve designed to simulate the rocky terrain he once ruled. He kept mostly to himself, lounging on sandstone ledges during the day, emerging at dusk to patrol the boundary. Occasionally, he would pause and gaze toward the far southern ridge, where the canyons ran deep and quiet. Children visited him often, escorted by Maya or other staff. They'd stand behind reinforced glass and whisper, "That's him, the real one." And sometimes, when the light hit just right, they could see the faint line of a scar running along his side. Faint but forever. One morning, as the wind carried the scent of creosote and new rain, Rebecca visited Asher alone. No cameras, no reporters. Just a woman and a lion. She knelt by the fence, her ranger uniform crisp, her badge glinting in the sun. Asher approached slowly, as if recognizing the rhythm of her steps. They stood face to face for a long while, separated only by the wire mesh and time. "Thank you," she whispered. Asher didn't move, but his eyes held her gaze. Something passed between them again. Ancient, silent, understood. Then he turned and walked back into the golden light. Sometimes, the most powerful protectors come not in armor, but in silence. This story reminds us that courage isn't always loud, and kindness doesn't ask for reward. In a world that often forgets the quiet strength of nature, may we never overlook the value of compassion, even from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in grace, even in the wildest corners of life. Leave a comment below and type amen if you believe that every act of love, human or animal, is a blessing worth remembering. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of faith, sacrifice, and the bond that connects all living beings. May God bless you and those you hold dear.